Scott Kravitz.
When I was up here at the last anniversary show, almost exactly a year ago, I told a story about finding a dog in my driveway and ultimately deciding to keep her, despite the fact that she already belonged to a homeless girl, which I didn't find out until I was already totally attached to the dog. So what followed was a series of negotiations with the girl that at one point involved a kind of a duel in which the two of us stood about 20 feet apart. While the dog, whose name was Anne, sat in the middle. And then we each called to her as a way to prove ownership. I'm sure that Anne developed whatever complex it is that kids of divorced parents get. But in the end, I got to keep the dog, which meant completely changing my life from that of a bachelor with a rental apartment to being part of a couple with this dog and actually buying a house because I couldn't find a place that would let me keep her. Well, in the years since telling that story, Anne passed away, which totally destroyed me. And I think that a lot of people who go through a trauma like this find that you only have a certain amount of time that you can talk about it with your friends before they start expecting you to move on. And it's not that they're indifferent, it's just not their loss. And even though it's only been 2 months, I can already sense people getting a little restless when I bring up Anne, so I have to hold my tongue and not talk about her. So I'm really glad that I've got you all here today. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and try to convince you that Anne was this exceptional dog. You'll just have to trust me. But for the people here who have dogs, I just ask that you try to visualize your own dog and then visualize something much better. The thing is, when I told the story about Anne last year, she was actually in the middle of a kind of physical renaissance where she was running and hiking with me again. Before that, she had been declining terribly from arthritis, and she was losing weight, and she was walking so slowly. If you've ever been in a wedding procession and can imagine walking 6 blocks at that pace, that's what it was like taking Anne for a walk. But I loved her so much that it got to the point where my mood was completely dictated by her condition. If she was happy, I was happy, and if she was down, I was really down. And feeding her in the morning was like shaking a magic 8-ball and asking, am I going to have a good day today? And if she ate all her food, then the answer was yes, definitely. And if she didn't, then the outlook wasn't so good. Finally, a friend pointed out to me that I was experiencing what they call anticipatory grief. I was psychically trying to prepare myself for Anne's death. And he suggested I go to this pet loss support group, which I did. And it was basically this kind of group therapy thing where everybody sits in a circle and each person tells their story. And I cried more than anyone, even though I was the only person there whose pet was actually still alive. I left it actually feeling a lot better, mostly because I thought that I had told the best story. The thing is, I've always had this really difficult relationship with death. Ever since I was 5 and first found out about it, what had happened was a boy in my kindergarten class turned to me during story time and told me that everybody has to die. And of course I called him a liar, but when I got home I asked my mom if it was true, and when she very gently said that yes, in fact, it is true, I had a little 5-year-old nervous breakdown. I cried for 3 days, I wouldn't leave my room. Basically, I hated my parents because I felt that in giving me life, they had trapped me in this body that's going to die. And it was like the worst form of claustrophobia because I couldn't think of a way out of this body that didn't, involve dying. And my parents did everything they could to console me, but I finally said to them, look, if you really loved me, you never would have had me. Eventually, though, I was able to come up with a plan that would allow me to live forever. I had seen a news story on television about a new life support machine that was being installed in a local hospital, and I told my parents that I wanted to grow up to be a doctor because I wanted to work in a place where I'd always be near that machine. towards the end of college, I found I was much more interested in veterinary medicine, and I went to work at an animal hospital as a vet tech. And there was this one doctor there who was a good vet, but he had no bedside manner. He never knew what to say when the owners became emotional. So anytime he had to perform a euthanasia, he would ask me to assist him so that I could console the owners while he would try to look busy with his stethoscope. But then one day he said something really beautiful. He was talking to a man whose dog had been brought in with an abscess in its side. The abscess had been cleaned, and the dog was being sent home with a piece of rubber tubing sticking out of the wound so that it could continue to drain. But the owner was really upset because he thought that the wound should have been closed, and the doctor said, no, we don't want it to be closed. This is a kind of wound that has to heal from the inside out. Eventually, the abscess will be gone, but there will always be a scar. And I think that this is me talking, not the doctor anymore. I think that by surrounding myself with so much suffering to the point where it was just a job, I was really actually trying to inure myself to build up this tolerance to sadness. I was really trying to prepare myself for the day when my own family's dog, a dog I had grown up with named Barney, was going to die. And when that day finally did come, I asked one of the vets that I worked with, not the awkward one, another one, to come to my car where I had made a bed for Barney in the back seat, and we euthanized him there. And it was on that same back seat, exactly 2 years later, that I placed Anne on the day that I first found her in my driveway. And I remember looking at her there and thinking, even though I had no intention of keeping her at the time, I knew I was playing a really dangerous game. I knew that if I let that animal into my heart, one day she would leave me bereft. But of course I signed that deal long before I knew I had, and for the next 12 years I took this dog everywhere with me. I spent as much time with her as I could. Of course, like a lot of people, one of my big regrets is not taking enough pictures. And I think part of the reason for that is I've always had this terrible ambivalence about carrying a camera around. I feel like photography forces you to choose between living in the moment and documenting it. And you can't do both, because in order to take a picture, you have to take yourself out of a situation and view it through a lens. Like I had this one film professor who was shooting a film of a live birth for which he had loaded 2 cameras so that when the first one ran out of film, rather than stopping to reload, he could just reach for the second camera and keep shooting. So after several minutes of filming the bloody miracle of childbirth, he hears the camera roll out and he puts it down, and then he reaches for the second camera, and in that moment he happened to glance at the actual birth for the first time without a lens, and he passed out. So photography for me was always that choice, and I usually pick direct experience. Although I do have an interesting video from a time when I accidentally left the camera on record and captured a close-up of Anne taking a nap for 2 hours. It's like Andy Warhol's Sleep, but much cuter. So the reason I was so obsessively trying to appreciate the present is because I wanted so badly to experience every moment with Anne in such a way that the memory of it might sustain me after she was gone. But it wasn't working. As hard as I tried, I just kept thinking about this terrible future without her. And one day I was talking to a friend about this frustration of never being able to be in the present because I was always so worried about it ending. And he told me about this Welsh word, hiraeth, which means a longing for something you already have. It's that feeling when you're in a moment so wonderful that all you can do is mourn its passing, even as it's happening. But then, just last week, I tried looking up the word online. I found it doesn't mean that at all. It actually just means a longing to be in Wales. But I figure if you're in Wales and you still feel Hiraeth, then that's probably close enough. The point is that you can never really prepare yourself for the loss of something you love. Anne's death, as inevitable as it was, meant a realization of some of my worst fears, and no life support machine could change that. And sometimes after a loss like this, somebody will ask you, or you'll ask yourself, if the few years of happiness is worth all the sadness that inevitably follows. And despite the pain that I'm feeling now, and despite the longing to be in Wales, I don't need a magic 8-ball to answer that question. Thanks.